I'll record in the cloud, and we're recording. Okay, good day, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this, I think, exciting and an empowering look at what Beth and Peter Bostwick have lived, what they've learned, and are now sharing through their book, You Can Choose. The Purdue Alumni Association is so happy to present great content like this to our members. My name is Pat Brown. I'm the director of digital marketing for the Purdue Alumni Association, and it's my genuine pleasure to lead tonight's conversation with Beth and Peter. I'll let them share about themselves as they choose, but as a matter of introduction, they're both master's graduates from the Krannert School of Management here at Purdue. They have years of corporate and entrepreneurial experience, including both high highs and low lows. And they have drawn from these lessons to publish their book and present to groups like you. I think you're going to find them warm, open, and really excited about what the future holds, not just for them, but for you, me, and anyone else that they can reach. A quick housekeeping note: please keep your microphones muted. You can ask questions via the message or the chat feature. We are recording this presentation, and it will be available to you in the next couple days. Look for an email that will provide that link. With that, let's say hi to Beth and Peter. Anything you'd like to tell everyone before we begin?
Oh, we're excited to hear what people want to know. I mean, they can read a lot of stuff on our website, but we could probably interpret maybe some things through some quite great questions. So we're excited.
Yes, we're definitely excited about the questions. It's so much fun to banter back and forth with those. So.
Yeah. Just so everybody knows, when you see me on screen, I have another screen over here, so I'll be looking this way occasionally. It's not disinterest or disrespect. It's me reading my notes to make sure that I get through things. We're going to start right off with questions from people. How have your life experiences, your education in human resources, and your work experience, how did those things contribute to you developing your own careers?
Ooh, is that specifically for me as a degree in HR? Or
well, yes, since you have the HR degree, I suppose.
Okay. So one of the things that I think is really important when you're an entrepreneur is you understand how people operate. And in HR, you get a great perspective right up close with the most challenging cases in any company. And you also see how people manage, and some people aren't really good at it and some people are. And so I think that background was certainly helpful. It doesn't make it any easier, but it's a piece of knowledge that I think a lot of people coming out of just a general business program and not having worked in human resources, they don't really understand it. And I would argue at that time, people didn't really value it. I think there's a little more awareness about that today, since just in Silicon Valley, talent is comes at such a premium, and so it's really focused on trying to keep people once you get them in. But that was certainly not the case in most of the places I worked. So.
Yeah, and I don't have an HR background, but I do know the importance of people, and your company will survive and thrive or fail depending on what you do with your people and how your people are able to contribute. Right? The technology is certainly important, but how you apply the technology and how you make it work is vital to success.
I love this question. What made you successful entrepreneurs, and what motivated you to keep doing so without giving up?
Well, the thing you can't see are my knees, because they have so many scars and dings on them from falling down and getting back up. And that's pretty much par for the course for any entrepreneur. I don't care, how experienced or inexperienced you are. So you really have to be willing to just get back up. In fact, for a couple of years, I just described myself as those bozo punching bags that have the sand on the bottom. You take a good hit and it falls down, it slowly comes back up. And that's kind of the way it was for a good, couple of years for sure. So, that's a core competency, I think, for anybody who's going to be a successful entrepreneur, is that you just get back up and you think creatively and, okay, well, this didn't work, so I'll try it a different way. So that's why it's so important to know what you want.
And you have to consciously choose when you're going to quit, right? Because it's not like somebody comes in and takes away your company or takes away your idea. One day you'll just stop and then you'll quit. If if you choose to do that. Or what you'll do instead is you'll just keep coming to work and you'll keep making it happen. And that's really how it goes. Every day you choose what you're going to do. Every minute actually you choose what you're going to do. But from an entrepreneurial perspective, every day you choose, okay, am I going to keep going? Am I going to do it or am I not going to do it? And as long as you keep showing up and making it work, it's working.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that you're necessarily being successful, but I can guarantee you won't be successful if you do, hand in the towel and say, or throw in the towel, excuse me, and say, I'm done. But if you keep plugging away at it and you get your mindset in a position where you can be successful, then eventually you'll get there.
Yeah.
We've had a couple of people who've submitted questions specific, Beth, about your experience with MS. I want to bridge that a little further out. Everybody has challenges. Maybe it's MS, maybe it's 1,000 other things. Everybody has some type of limiting factor or certainly an influencing factor. Talk about, how do you make peace with that which you cannot negotiate?
This has been a journey for me. I've known I have it. I've known I've had it for almost 30 years now. And one of the things that when we first started You Can Choose, which is all about the way you think and the power of your thinking, I didn't really quite get it. And I remember early on, just a couple of years ago, when we first started talking about this stuff and really trying to understand just how powerful your thinking is, I went back to those early days when I was at Purdue, actually, where I didn't know what was wrong with me, but my body just kept shutting down different parts. The circuits weren't working, so to speak. And so I remember at one point I had a spinal tap and it was leaky. And so I ended up with a spinal headache for a good week. And so I couldn't go to class. I was pretty much flat out. We were going to school at the same time. So he was in class all day and I could barely get up to go to the bathroom. It was pretty gnarly. But I remember when I was laying on my back, spent a lot of time thinking because I really couldn't do anything, couldn't read. And it was then that I really, I think, first experienced spending time in my own head and really watching my thinking and paying attention to what was going on around me. And I remember at one point I made a choice that this could break me, whatever the heck it was, because at that point I still didn't know what was going on, or it could really help me move forward. And so I made the choice that I was not going to take it, quote, lying down, so to speak. I was going to stand up and figure some way out. And it was that thinking that I revisited a couple of years ago. We really started to understand that the way you think is very powerful. And I, in fact, was doing it at that time very consciously. Now, I will also say that we think all the time. So it's not like I just was thinking back then when I was in school and now I'm thinking now again. But I was very aware of my thinking in that time frame. And I think the choice I made to not let it turn me into a yucky, ugly person is, I think, very important for me, was important for me then and still is, because that's where you make the choice to move forward. And I would say go through it versus letting it take you down. Does that help? I mean, was that clear?
Yeah. I think it butts right up to somebody asked, they want, out of this session, they want strategies for cultivating optimism. Well, I don't know if it's optimism or it's determination, but what are some ways, either through your experience or subsequently, are you trying to generate optimism always, or is it not always optimism, but result?
I like to say we're always good at that, but no, it's not always that way.
Yeah, that's a tricky one because you wake up in the morning and maybe things aren't going your way, and and maybe you paste a smile on your face to kind of get you through it, but faking it, faking it can help you get there, but that's not the way to live, right? You want to get to a place where you're genuinely content or genuinely comfortable with where you are. And whether that's optimism or happiness or whatever it is, I mean, that's great. But I don't think we have to try to be or aspire to be, you know, giddy all the time and always have I know people that do that. They look like they're the happiest people in the world, but if you get to know them or see what's going on behind the scenes, that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
So you don't want to broadcast falsism, because then all you're doing is repressing some of the anger that you have. But you can be in a good place, and it's a choice that you make, not what happened to you, but what are you going to do about it today?
Right. It's always looking forward. That's the thing that's important. And you can dwell on the past. I mean, everybody has that choice to make. But I think my father said it really well. He said, look at the past to understand what it is you should learn. But beyond that, don't spend any more time there. Always be looking ahead and living for what you want in life. And you know, happiness is one of many things that people want. I mean, there's satisfaction, there's contentment, there's other ways to look at it. So I think that if you're always looking for what it is that's going to get you to a point where you're happier or more content and more satisfied, that's great. But the point is to keep looking forward, not looking back, except to learn from things that you've done. And that, I know, is one of the things that we used, not consistently, but we did use it when we were in our really dark days for several years there. But whatever you're thinking is what you're attracting to you in your life. So, and I think the false happiness is no different than false modesty kind of thing. You know, just if you're not really feeling it, then it's not really there. So you need to kind of explore what those feelings actually are that are in there. So.
While you were talking, it occurred to me, my wife and I have been married almost 30 years. And if you asked us today to define what love is, that answer would be so completely different from when we were first, you know, married.
Right.
Because you have seasons of life and things change and they evolve and they grow. So I rarely exude optimism, but I always try and exude confidence that, you know, whatever it is, we're going to be okay. So I think I concur with you that happiness or optimism isn't always going to be your primary driver, and that's okay.
Right.
Exactly. As long as that's where you're at. Yeah. Yeah.
You can't get it wrong. I mean, you can't get it wrong. And I think that's one thing that people don't realize is you're not going to get it wrong. Whatever you do, you do. And so I think that in and of itself can help you feel more confident.
So talk a little bit about, I haven't mentioned really anything about the book yet, but talk about the ideals that are expressed in the book, because I don't think you would call them rules, but thoughts. Just explain it for a few minutes, how the book takes a look at life.
Well, one of the big things that we say in there is that your thoughts matter and you can choose your thoughts. I mean, that's one of the core principles. That's the word we use, the principles there for that. Your thoughts matter, and that's huge, right? If you realize that what you think about makes a difference in your life, that's transformative. So, because you think all the time, we constantly think, as Beth was mentioning before, you thought before, you think in the future, your head is always going, and what you're doing with it makes a difference. So if you can tap into that incredibly powerful muscle, if you will, or technology that you have, or whatever you want to call it, tap into that for your benefit, then that is just incredibly powerful. Mm-hmm. And then if you can choose what that is, it makes all the difference in the world. You can really go for it.
Well, I guess I would say, he said, if you can choose, you can choose. You don't have to consciously choose. You can just kind of operate autonomously. But I do think that one of the other pieces that's really important is that you, in fact, can choose. Even when it looks like you have absolutely no choices, that's not true. You do have choices. And you just need to begin to understand and see what they are. And I think those two are really, really powerful. And then I would add another one on top of it that I think is particularly valuable is look for some little bitty thing, especially when you're in a really dark place, that's working for you. I don't care what it is. Maybe you've got great eyelashes. Maybe you love your toes. Whatever it is, something about you that you really, really like. Maybe it's the fact that you have a beautiful voice. take that and appreciate that and spend time thinking about that. Don't think about all this other stuff that's not working for you, because what happens then is you focus on the gap between where you are and where you want to go, instead of where you actually want to be. You want to feel and sense where you are when you're getting everything it is that you want. You don't want to pay attention to where you are now and how much farther you got to go. That's not where you want to spend your time. So I think those pieces are what's really key to moving what you can choose.
Yeah, very much so.
Closely related to that, several people's questions here, but right up to that with, what do you do with external forces that we're conditioned to react to? You know, how do you change the way that you think about friends, relatives, bosses, coworkers, and their opinion of you and your performance and
Sure.
whatever?
So first off, you have to recognize you're most important. You absolutely are the most important thing in the world, okay? Peter's the most important thing to Peter. I'm the most important thing to Beth. You're important to yourself, Pat, but what you say to me, I choose whether that's important to me or not. And the way I choose impacts how I see the world. So if what you say to me at whatever it is, I interpret as, oh, that's negative, bad, well, guess what? I'm gonna get more of that negativity in my life. But if I interpret it, whatever it is you're saying, the other way and say, you know, okay, I appreciate that. Let it go, move on. You don't stay stuck with that negativity. And I think that's the piece that people don't realize. They can choose to move away from all the negativity. They don't have to consume it. I mean, it's good to know what's going on and being aware at some level, but you don't have to internalize it and just feel yucky because of those things. You have a choice to move through it.
Yeah, people can only influence you if you let them influence you. You know, there's a saying out there that, oh, she made me so mad, or she made me this, or he made me this. It's like, oh, nobody made you anything. You chose.
You did. You
right.
made it.
And it's not like, okay, boom, you can all of a sudden get there. It might take, if you're conditioned to respond to what other people say as gospel, or maybe they're more important than you are, it might take you a little while to get there.
You think they're more important.
If you think that, yeah, thank you. If you think, thank you, Beth. If you think that they're more important than you are, you give them more credit or more validity than you give yourself. If that's how you were raised, then you might have a little bit of a little bit to overcome to get to that point where you say, no, I don't care what you think about me.
Right. And it takes time. It's like Peter said, it doesn't happen overnight. And I think the thing that's really important is that you find the piece of you that you really like, you really appreciate, and you really spend time with that. Again, how big or small it is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean you're bragging or you're, conceited or anything. It's that you're appreciating one of the talents or skills that you have. And I think that the more you start to do that, and you really you build that relationship with yourself, and that you are loved, and that by yourself, if other people don't love you, or throw yucky stuff your way, then it's harder to, but you can still, in your moments, your special time, you can build that up. And I think that's a really underrated piece of the world today. Is we're all taking all this stuff at us and thinking, oh my gosh, but it all starts here. And if you manage some of that stuff here in terms of the way you think about yourself, this just gets stronger and stronger, and you start to exude that confidence, and then people notice that, and they don't send the negative things your way as much. So it grows.
And there's another piece too, and that we started to use. It's like, well, how important is it to you? Right? So if someone's giving you some feedback, or somebody has an opinion, and it doesn't jive with what you have to say, you have the ability to determine for yourself how important is either what they're talking about, or the subject, or even their opinion. And if it's not important to you, and if you make that decision, well, that's not important to me, then if you can actually just let it slip right off of you. And it's amazing how empowering that is when you realize that you have the choice on how important how much importance you assign to somebody else's anything.
And the other thing I guess I'll say is sometimes people do have valid criticisms or feedback or something. And I think what's really important is that you hear the criticism for what it is. Don't read stuff into it. Just, be real, like Sergeant Friday on Dragnet. Just the facts, ma'am. You just stick to what that is. Don't infer all kinds of things with it. You take it and you build on that. And the next time you're interacting with that person who's giving you that feedback, expect the best part of that person to come your way, not the negative part. I mean, maybe they still need to give you feedback, and that's okay, but expect the person who's going to deliver it to you in a way that it makes sense and it's more helpful versus critical. And I think that if you take that viewpoint, shift that thinking in your own head, and I would say this is even more important for people that you just don't jive with for whatever reason. If you learn to look for the best in them, then what's going to start to happen is you will see that part of them show up. It's just amazing. It's just amazing.
It really works. And we've had that experience with each other where we weren't always our best friends. And then after we've grown to be more comfortable with ourselves, then we eventually become more comfortable with each other. We basically attract the better part
right.
of each other.
And that's after 34 years of marriage. So I gotta say, we've been in this a while.
I want to ask this question because I don't want anybody to walk away with an excuse. You've been married 34 years. You've had business success. You've overcome obstacles. Do the principles of you can choose have to be attained through life, or can a person who's just now getting their undergrad degree, can they exercise this and learn to choose? Great
question, because, gosh, it was about 2 years ago, I said to Peter, I said, why didn't anybody teach me this stuff 20 years ago? And so we have now made it our task to get out there and say, look, this is the way the world really works. You can choose to do it or not, but it just works this way. And so it doesn't matter how old you are, how young you are, how experienced or inexperienced, it's not relevant, because it all starts with you and the way you think. And little kids, in fact, that's a good point. Little kids, they do this naturally. If you watch kids on the playground, they bang around each other and, but they're running around, they're screaming, they're doing their thing. And as we get older, a lot of that freedom and that just go do it gets socialized out of us. And so I think the older you get, the perhaps more challenges you have because you have more experiences to overcome. On the other hand, it doesn't make it any harder or easier if you start younger. It's just doing it and getting started and starting to live your life this way. Then all of a sudden, it's amazing. The clouds just kind of dissipate, and all of a sudden, it's like, wow, it's sunny out here. When did that happen? It's just amazing.
Yeah, without a doubt, you can start absolutely any time that you're ready to get started. And like Beth said, I wish somebody had tapped us on the shoulder 20, 30, 40 years ago and say, hey, listen, you can choose the way that you think. You don't have to sit and beat yourself up or think that everybody's against you or whatever it is, or think you have to work especially hard in order to make something happen. You can choose. You basically create your own rules, mm-hmm. which is so hard for people to understand if you don't understand some of these principles. But that's the case. You create your own rules, so why make it hard?
Right. And the other thing too, I'll add on that. Peter mentioned rules, but I'd argue beliefs are kind of operate like that for mm-hmm. us. And for many, especially if you're a little bit older, you don't realize you have these beliefs that are kind of running in the background until all of a sudden something happens. Like, where'd that come from? And then if you spend time in your head, you can start to figure it out. And sometimes they're buried a little bit more deeply than others. But you can always change those. And what we tell people is, if you discover a belief or a rule, I kind of see them as the same thing in terms of your actions or what you choose to do. You can always change it. And the way to pay attention to it after you've discovered it is to ask yourself, well, is this belief working for me? And if it's not working for you, then say, I don't need it. And the next time you catch yourself automatically going a certain direction, this is where you have to pay attention. You say, I don't think like this anymore. This is not the way I operate. So move on. But you know, it takes a little bit of time to pay attention and catch yourself. But there's something that I had written about actually in a post a little while ago called No Beth. And it was me telling myself in my head that, no, Beth, you don't think like this anymore. Stop it. And so it was a great example of how I created a tool for myself to catch myself in my own thinking when I found a belief or something like that that just, it wasn't relevant anymore. So
interjecting my own life, the voice in my head belongs to a psychopath who hates me. And it took a long time to figure out to tell that voice, sit down, shut up, it's not your turn to talk, and you don't own me.
Right.
I mean, people really, and I'm not alone in this. I've had a lot of people share the voice in our head is so hard to deal with, especially under stressful circumstances, it seems.
It is. And I think that that's why it's really important to build a relationship with yourself, this part of you. Because when you, and it takes time to do that. You know, first time it's kind of scary. It's like, okay, so who really am I when you look in the mirror? But the more you start to understand who you are and who you've become over the years, then you start to understand more about yourself, the way you think, what's important to you, what's not important to you. And that's where you start to filter out the stuff that society sends your way. It's like, you know, some things is just like, that doesn't matter to me anymore. I don't care. It's not relevant. And I think one of the first parts of the book, we talk about the user's manual and how you need to go back sometimes and relook at the user manual because some of the stuff doesn't work for you anymore. And that's where you kind of get that journey started. But you can come at it from any place. You can come up from a really dark hole, just kind of where we found ourselves, or you can come out and say, you know, I really like to make these kinds of changes in my life because of whatever, and start to pay attention to it. So it really doesn't matter how you come at it.
Yeah. We have a question here on the chat. I'd like their thoughts on building self-confidence in oneself, specifically having confidence to build a successful startup while my current skill set, both soft and hard skills, seem not enough for me to reach the goal. So it's a little more on what you were just talking about trying to build the strength to believe in yourself and your choices.
Yeah, and that's critical, to believe in yourself. And we talked a little bit about that yesterday, and the importance of having confidence in yourself and belief in yourself as you start to go out and build your company or build your business, because you're going to be either your best friend or your worst enemy throughout the process. And you want to build up a level of trust in yourself that you can count on yourself as you run into challenging situations. And if you don't have that, then starting a business is probably not the best way to get it. I mean, there are other ways to get it incrementally as you go, because you do want to build that up. And if you can build up your confidence and do so incrementally, you'll be in a much stronger position.
I mean, you can do it through sports, you can do it through hobbies. I mean, it doesn't always have to revolve around work.
And I remember before we started the company, I went and spent some time at Toastmasters. So I found Toastmasters for where I was, because at that point I was struggling with depression quite a bit. I was working at a company that I didn't feel like I had any choices. And I remember it was our early risers Toastmasters. So we got together at 6:30 a.m. on Tuesday mornings. And sure enough, I remember going in there and just doing it. And the difference, and I went through and did the whole, whatever it was called, the competent speaker series or something. I can't remember what it was now, but a fantastic program. And I remember going through that whole situation. And the difference between myself in the beginning and at the end was really big, because I just used that as every day or every week, in this case here, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make the changes, and it was reflected in how I felt about myself. And that's just one example of what you could do to start building up confidence in yourself.
Right.
Because you need that if you're going to be an entrepreneur.
I would argue that if you're not confident in your abilities, your business is not going to be a success, because your business is a reflection of you. And it certainly was for us. Even after we had built up a successful business, it became a reflection of us, and we, nearly bottomed out and fell apart kind of thing. But we, were able to resurrect it. But still, that confidence is a direct line to the people you work with, your customers, your employees. If you don't have it, then they're not going to have it. So you need to do that first.
Yeah, because people can sense if you're confident, right? You walk into a room, or somebody else walks into the room, and you can tell whether people have that energy around them. And it's difficult to sell yourself and your product or your company or your service if you're kind of feeling not strong. So you need to have that feeling as you go in there to make it work, because people will know.
Yep.
I think it would be interesting to know the volume of dollars that we spend on recreational physical activity and betterment versus psychosocial betterment.
But I think they're related, Pat. I think they're related. I mean, just for me, my bicycle is my yoga mat. I do lots of great stuff on the bike. Nobody has to hear me. I get a good workout, and I come back, and I've expelled a bunch of demons. But I think that the piece that I think becomes important is, how do you then take that into your life in a positive way and build on it, which I think is partly what you're talking about there.
And I think there's a lot of stigma too associated with working on your mind. I think we all feel good, and we get, we have sports that we get to watch, athletes, but also if you really listen to what's going on in the sporting world, they are spending a lot of time and a lot of energy and a tremendous amount of resources working on the mental aspect of the game, right? You can do so much physically, but if you don't have the mental attitude, the mental capacity, the mental resilience to excel, you're not going to be at the top of your game. So people are seeing that, and I think sports is, like Beth said, sports is a way to see that coming through. But I think there'll be a time, and it'll be a little ways down the road, but I think there'll be a time where people will talk about going to spinning class, yoga class, and meditation class, or mindfulness class.
All at the same time.
Or they'll go to a class in the morning, and they'll get together. I've had this vision, and I'd love to work with someone to put it together. It was really a morning boot camp type of a thing, right? Every morning you get there, and before you go into yoga class or before you go into your spinning class, you spend 15, 20 minutes working on what you're thinking about and getting yourself psyched out for doing that. There's no course available for that yet, and I know there's a desperate need for it.
My wife is an occupational therapist, so I'm almost as smart as her because I sat by her for the last 30 years. But definitively, physical activity reorganizes the brain, especially in children. And runners talk about the runner high, and people who exercise regularly talk about they need it to stay happy, motivated, satisfied. So there really is that physical component to mental health. So we are running out of time. Last question, and this is almost a plea. I need to find my voice and stop doubting myself. I feel like that's at the core of your book. So maybe that's a good question to kind of inform.
So you have your voice, you're just not listening to it. You need to learn how to listen to yourself. And when I say yourself, it's not necessarily the person that's saying, or part of you that's saying, bang, 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 you're bad, you're bad, you're bad. It's the part of you that knows you're not bad, that knows you're good. You're just not listening to that part of you. You're just listening to the other one. So you need to kind of just adjust the dial a little bit, if you will.
And I've got your book here, and one of the pages that I had marked and highlighted is the limits that exist are only the limits we create. We create limits as individuals and as a society, and many of us are comfortable living in the current boundaries we've set for ourselves. Right. Better to hate my jailer than to walk out the door. you know, kind of an idea. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Last thoughts, pitch your newsletter. We will send you guys an email, everybody who's on the call. We'll send you an email with some great links to things that Beth and Peter do to the recording of this. But any last thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, we're really excited about this opportunity. So thank you, Pat, for giving this this forum, for sharing some of our ideas. Honestly, you can choose, and once people embrace their ability to choose, the world is a much more powerful and exciting place to live.
It is. It is. So I just echo the same thing. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
We're in a very different place now than we were. So.
Super. Well, I appreciate you so much. On behalf of the Purdue Alumni Association and all of our members, I want to thank you for a wonderful conversation. All of you on the call, please watch for an email in the next day or two. It will have a link to this recording, and you can look for, and we'll have a link to also where you can find Beth and Peter's book, You Can Choose, wherever you buy books. This ends our webinar. I thank you all for your time, for your questions and attendance. Have a pleasant rest of your day.
Mm.